Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is your brother Idris al-Bakri, and I'm honored to be hosting tonight's virtual mosque event. I'm a little nervous because I've got like two monitors staring at me. I've got a director in the back, cameras. The mosque masjid, subhanAllah, has been turned into a recording studio, mashallah. But before we get to our program, we want to seek the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God Almighty, through the recitation of the Quran. Tonight's recitation will be by Afnan Mukhtar, a grade 12 student at GH Bruns Collegiate and an active youth in our community. Afnan, go ahead.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم للرجال نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون وللنساء نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون مما قل منه أو كثر نصيبا مفروضا وإذا حضر القسمة أولو القربى واليتامى والمساكين فارزقوهم منه وقولوا لهم قولا معروفا وليخشى الذين لو تركوا من خلفهم ذرية ضعافا خافوا عليهم فليتقوا الله وليقولوا قولا سديدا إن الذين يأكلون أموال اليتامى ظلما إنما يأكلون في بطونهم نارا وسيصلون سعيرا يوصيكم الله في أولادكم للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين فإن كن نساء فوق 2 فلهن ثلثا ما ترك وإن كانت واحدة فلها النصف ولأبويه لكل واحد منهما السدس مما ترك إن كان له ولد فإن لم يكن له ولد وورثه أبواه فلأمه الثلث فإن كان له إخوة فلأمه السدس من بعد وصية يوصي بها أو دين آباؤكم وأبناؤكم لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا فريضة من الله إن الله كان عليما حكيما صدق الله العظيم. Men shall have a share in what their parents and closest relatives leave, and women shall have a share in what their parents and closest relatives leave, whether the legacy be small or large. This is ordained by God. If other relatives, orphans, or needy people are present at the distribution, give them something too, and speak kindly to them. Let those who would fear for the future of their own helpless children, if they were to die, show the same concern for orphans. Let them be mindful of God and speak out for justice. Those who consume the property of orphans unjustly are actually swallowing fire into their own bellies. They will burn in the blazing flame. Concerning your children, God commands you that a son should have the equivalent share of 2 daughters. If there are only daughters, 2 or more should share 2/3 of the inheritance. If once, she should have half. Parents inherit a sixth each if the deceased leaves children. If he leaves no children and his parents are his sole heirs, his mother has a 1/3, unless he has brothers, in which case she has a 1/6. In all cases, the distribution comes after payment of any bequests or debts. You cannot know which of your parents or your children is more beneficial to you. This is Allah from God, and He is all-knowing, all-wise.
Thank you very much, Afnan. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-knowing and all-wise. As you can see, mashallah, Afnan has a beautiful voice, and every time we have a virtual mosque event, we are trying to feature and showcase some of the amazing young people like Afnan, brothers and sisters who are applying themselves to study and learn the Quran. And we are blessed to having so many of them. Thank you very much, Afnan. So I'm excited to start our discussion with our guest speaker, Professor Abed Awad, soon. But before that, we have a couple of orders of business to go through. So first, we are live on YouTube and Facebook. So make sure that you check us out there. And if you have any questions or comments throughout this broadcast, you can just enter them into the comment section, and inshallah, we will take them up as much as we go along. Also, we have we're going through a lockdown. We have a variety of programs and activities virtually online that will help us, inshallah, cut through this difficult time. Upcoming, as you may have seen in the opening slideshow, there's a mental health wellness program for youth, specifically for youth, that will be led by Dr. Natasha Ali, the head of our mental health initiative. Also, we are having our first ever social media khatam. So every day on Facebook, one page of the Quran will be posted. You can read it and just comment done. And inshallah, we hope and aim to finish the Quran on Facebook together. And inshallah, we are now, alhamdulillah, into our second juz'u. So mashallah, bravo to everybody who's a part of that. Imam Atif, and I just want to say that with this kind of time, it's nothing is better than coming close to the Quran. So Imam Atif is also doing a daily Quran halaqa on Zoom at 7 o'clock every day, and you can find the link for that on the MIA website, miaonline.org. And we welcome your ideas. We are looking for ideas, volunteers, talents to show on Virtual Mosque. So if you have any ideas, please email us, office@miaonline.org, or call 204-256-1347. And now for the other order of business, which is announcing the MIA baking competition. And we'll show a video with all the submissions. And then we're going to go live to Janice Lokes, our dear friend and city councilor for Waverly West, who was one of the judges for the baking competition. And she will have the honors of announcing the winner and the runner-ups. So to the video.
رقت عيناي شوقا ولطيبة ذرفت عشقا فأتيت إلى حبيبي فاهدأ يا قلب ورفقا صلي على محمد السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك.
Okay, and the winner is, so welcome, Janice. Thanks for being with us. How was it judging these cakes without tasting them?
Well, yeah, that was the difficult part too. But I tell you, I had to look up my architectural detail of the Kaaba to understand all the different parts and pieces, right?
Okay,
And,
great. Yeah.
It was incredible. It was incredible because we had some of them had the black stone, some of them had the Station of Abraham, gold doors, the Hatim, right? It was incredible. So,
Well,
boy,
you have really learned
it was
about the
great.
Kaaba's detail. That's great. That's awesome.
It's great. Neatness, creativity, attention to detail, a difficulty. Like, this is difficult work. This is detailed, difficult work. So I want to thank all the other judges. We all had individual scorecards. We scored it. We handed our scorecards in. There were 6 entries, as you saw. There's 5 runners up, and I just want to acknowledge right now to the runners up. MIA applied for a Winnipeg Wellness Grant, which I granted, so they're all going to have a $50 Skip the Dishes gift certificate. Also, the runners up.
Wonderful.
I guess now we'll announce the winner, right?
So everybody wins something, and then the winner gets the $100 Skip the Dishes gift certificate. Great.
Exactly.
Yeah. So who's the winner?
Well, the winner is Dujan Casas.
Dujan Casas. Congratulations, Dujan. You are the winner of MIA's baking competition.
Yes.
And everybody, thank you for your efforts. Thank you, Janice, for agreeing to be a judge and for actually, taking this so seriously as to going and learning about the structure of the Kaaba and its different parts. So Dujan, MIA will be in touch with you and with everybody, and with the prizes. And thank you, Janice, for always supporting MIA and the Muslim community. So thank you for the grant, so we can recognize everybody's efforts in making these cakes. It was unfortunate that we could not taste them, but we're in lockdown. That's okay, and hopefully this will over be soon, and we'll have another competition where we actually can get together and taste these cakes. So thanks again. Thanks for the judges. Thank you, Janice. Thanks to all the participants, and I want to also thank Zaina Abazid, who put together this wonderful video for us. She's, mashallah, a very talented young sister in the community. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, so we now can turn to our main topic of our evening discussion that I'm actually personally very excited about. So a few years ago, I prepared a will, and I had to wrestle with some of the issues about how we can apply, Islamic guidelines on inheritance to us Muslims living in Canada and in the Western societies in general. And alhamdulillah, many Muslims accept the law without question. But as Muslims also grow in knowledge and understanding, and so on, some of us will have questions, and some of us will want to understand things at a deeper level, and some of us actually may want to even challenge the law, and our reasoning might take us there. So do we accept that God can tell us what to do? Do we believe that the Sharia is universal and timeless? And so I'm very excited to welcome brother and Professor Abed Awad, not just because we share a common Palestinian heritage, but because I think he, mashallah, sets a wonderful example for how people can actually apply themselves, study, understand the religion deeply, and then use their professional expertise as well to move our understanding of Islam from theory to practice. He's got a very, very long biography, which I will try to condense in the little time we have. So Abed Awad is a Muslim American Islamic law expert and a practicing attorney. He's been teaching at Rutgers Law School for the past 15 years and has taught at Pace Law School and Seton Hall Law School as well. He's a fellow of the International Academy of Family Lawyers, and was a contributor and the U.S. editor for several years at ShariaSource.com, a Harvard Law School Islamic legal studies project. So over 2 decades of studying, teaching, and lecturing throughout the U.S. on Islamic law, and as through his own legal practice as well, he knows that many Muslims were opting out of creating Islamically compliant estate plans and wills due to their misunderstanding of the requirements of the Sharia. And so he leveraged his legal expertise, his native fluency in Arabic, and his extensive knowledge of Islamic law to find Sharia-compliant estate planning solutions. He's also the founder of ShariaWiz.com, that's ShariaWiz.com, an online portal that makes estate planning easy, affordable, and accessible. So we're going to structure our discussions we've done with other guests we've had. We're going to give our speakers some time to offer some opening remarks, and then we'll take your questions and try to engage in a conversation about this very important topic, inshallah. So I just want to say before we start that Brother Abed is a practicing attorney in the U.S. and not in Canada. So today we will not be offering any legal advice, per se, but we're going to be engaging him in his as a scholar of Islamic law and its application in the West, and we won't be actually giving any specific legal advice. If you need legal advice, you can always take the knowledge you've learned here and go seek the help of a local lawyer. So, Brother Abed, welcome to Winnipeg, although virtually, and over to you with some opening remarks.
السلام عليكم والصلاة والسلام على الصادق الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Thank you very much for hosting this, Brother Idris, and thanks for the tech team that's behind the scenes who make this happen. I'm very excited and honored to be virtually broadcast in Canada. I feel like the old movies, Star Trek, so I'm being beamed to Canada. So the best thing is to have a conversation about these issues, because people have questions, people have concerns. So maybe placing a little bit of a context is that what people have to understand, the Islamic law of inheritance in pre-Islamic Arabia, the system was tribal driven and male dominated, because only the males and the males who had the ability to fight and work and participate in defending the tribe were the people who were inheriting. Women and female, by and large, were not automatic legal heirs in pre-Islamic Arabia. So the tribe really was the socio-economic and racial setting for the way society was organized in pre-Islamic Arabia. The genius of Islam came to say conviction transcends tribe, race, color, creed, socioeconomic status. Conviction really of this belief in this monotheism, in this oneness of God, was the common bond that created the Muslim Ummah. So to look at the Islamic law of inheritance, you have to look at that particular context. So Islam and the moral Islamic message was, we don't want to leave things to the whims and the discretion of people. We have a system that needs to be overhauled, and the system now is going to make it by operation of divine directive that gender and women are going to receive inheritance that a male has no equitable or legal claim against. So we have to look at the role that Islamic law of inheritance played in actually leveling the economic playing field between men and women in Muslim society. So that's why you see these prescribed shares that are in Surah An-Nisa. Because the objective here is that you can't play around. This is the divine directive on how we can have economic equity between the sexes, how we can dissolve and circulate, or the better word is devolve and circulate wealth, so it's not concentrated in smaller groups and smaller hands. And that creates a lot of economic activity. So there's always divisions of assets, there's always inheritance, and people continue to progress and grow, and you don't have parents favoring one child over another or a relative over another. So we have to look at the Islamic law of inheritance from this equitable moral undergird or underpinning. So I think with that context, we can then go into some details about what the Islamic law of inheritance is. I'm happy to explain that, Idris, if you want me to, or do you have any questions, or do you want me to go ahead and give the basics of the Islamic law of inheritance?
I think, why don't you continue? I think you're kind of leading to something. I think I'd like to have you continue for a few more minutes, and then inshallah we've got some questions that we'll also discuss as we go along.
So the Islamic law of inheritance can be divided into three levels or three categories. You have what's called Ashab al-Furud. These are the Islamic heirs who are entitled to a prescribed share. And when we say ashab al-furud, we mean that the Quran expressly states that a father receives 1/6, a mother receives 1/6. If there are no males and the survivors are daughters, if it's one daughter, she'll receive 1/2. If there are two daughters, she'll receive 2/3. If they're maternal siblings, if there are more than 3 maternal siblings, and there's no grandfather, then the maternal siblings are going to take 1/3. So you have these prescribed shares. So these we call ashab al-furud. Then you have what we call the ta'sib takers, which are the heirs that would take by residue. So in other words, after the prescribed shares have been distributed, if anything is left, it's going to trickle down to this group of people who take by ta'sib. If you don't have anybody from ashab al-furud or from the category of ta'sib to be takers, then it would go to dhiwil arham. And these are descendants from your female line and lineage. And those are very rare. Now, while those are very rare in a Muslim country to have, in a mixed religious family, converts in North America, you'll have some of these issues actually coming into play. So these are the 3 categories of who inherits under Islamic law. And there are some rules and principles that the scholars created to use it. In fact, the algebra was born from the Islamic law of inheritance, because the scholars and the mathematicians had to create algebra to be able to calculate a lot of these Islamic inheritance fractions, because they can get complicated depending on who are the survivors. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would say that ilm al-fara'id nisf al-ilm. It's half of all knowledge. So that's why there was a huge emphasis from the scholars to study it and to understand it. You have the 2 other rules in the Islamic law of inheritance. One's called awal. And awal basically is the when the estate is exceeding the 100%, there has to be a reapportionment. And this Islamic legal doctrine is used to help you understand how to do the reapportionment. And then you have also ta'sib bil-rad. Rad is basically a return. So when there is money left or assets left in the estate, it explains how that rad is distributed upon or among the legitimate or taking Islamic heirs. That is the succinct, idiot's guide to Islamic law of inheritance. Yet it created volumes of commentary and hundreds of thousands of scholars and writings and fatwas and so forth. But that's the base. And the base of the Islamic law of inheritance is the Quran and the Sunnah. But more so, the Quran is pretty direct and express on detailing how a decedent's estate has to be distributed. And this is an apportionment from God.
Thank you for that. I think that was very interesting, and we're starting to get into some of the details. But I think that helped kind of set the stage for having those who are the Quran clearly states are heirs, and those who are ta'sib takers who take the residue, and then the wil arham, those who are from the sort of female lineage of the deceased. Now you kind of alluded that the Quran came. The Quran doesn't tell us how to pray, for example. It doesn't tell us a lot of details. It leaves them for the Sunnah. But in the issue of inheritance, it's now it's got fractions. It's actually telling us exact shares. In fact, yesterday my son was doing his fractions homework, and he was complaining. And I said, "Here, bring the Quran." And I showed him why he had to understand fractions, because he had to understand the Quran. But and you mentioned that one of the reasons for that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanting to ensure a more equitable distribution of wealth between the two genders. Are there any other underlying principles that are applied in Islamic law of inheritance when it looks at how the wealth is distributed after someone passes away?
I mean, it's basically to devolve wealth. So the objective of the Quranic message is that everybody should have a share. And it wants to make it easy that there's not much discretion with the person on how his estate is going to be distributed. When you compare the ummah concept and the Quranic moral message, it's community driven. It's about responsibility. In a Western based tradition, we are fixated on individualism. This absolute discretion, I can do whatever I want. This is about me. It's not about the community. So that's when you see the common law system of inheritance is giving a lot of leeway and discretion with the person on how he can leave his estate. The Quran, given its community-driven parameters, because you're building a socio-economic just society, it is saying that you have to have a devolution of your estate and everyone should have a piece, because that's what's fair. And we don't want to create more internal family friction and fighting because one parent preferred one family member as opposed to another. Now, that's why the Quran and the message about the wasiyya in Islam gives you some discretion. So it's kind of the golden mean. It says that if you are wealthy and you have enough assets, you have discretion up to 1/3 of your estate to distribute it to who you wish, except you cannot, in the Sunni law, you cannot give a part of that 1/3 to somebody who's already received a share in the qismah. So we're giving you some discretion, but we want to make sure that the estates are devolved equitably, fairly amongst all family members.
So, we have discretion up to 1/3 of our estate, but the remaining 2/3 has to be devolved to Ahl al-Fara'id and then those who come afterwards. Is that correct? Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct.
Now, you started by talking about pre-Islamic inheritance and how it was basically favoring males and favoring the those who can fight, those who can protect the tribe, and so on. But still, I think this is an issue that is I think is challenging especially in the West. But I think even in modern Muslim societies, when we look at the share, for example, for a wife, where she gets 1/8, daughters who get half of the sons get, and so on. And so, why is that? And why is that even perceived to be unfair? And are there Sharia compliant ways to address modern socioeconomic realities where we find that both males and females, husbands and wives, are sharing the financial burden of the family?
Oh, absolutely. But always when you want to find a solution, you want to first try to understand the historical context. The Sharia is a very sophisticated moral legal system. The rules of inheritance were born within a particular socio-economic structure, the mode of production, labor, tribe, extended family. These are very important variables to take into account to understand some of the shares. Once you dig in and understand that, that's when you start to develop Sharia solutions, because you're going to look at the changes, the socioeconomic changes today. It's not that the Sharia is not going to accommodate the socioeconomic changes. The Sharia rules do not evolve and are not extracted from a vacuum. They're extracted based on variables of that period of time. When those variables of that period of time change, the fiqh rules are going to adjust and change. because the only thing that's a constant in the Sharia is the ultimate quest to serve Allah's directives, which is justice, mercy, fairness, and ethical lifestyle. So we're constantly striving towards that. And when we understand that that's the main objective, our rules are going to evolve according to the underlying circumstances. So in pre-Islamic Arabia, a son, see, look at the difference here. In the United States, my son does not have a legal obligation to support his mother. The only person who has a legal obligation to support his mother is myself. I'm her husband. So she can sue me for divorce and alimony, and I have to support her. But she can't sue her son. Under the Islamic legal system, a son has financial obligations to support his mother, period. So he has to work. He has a responsibility. So there's a legal action, there's a legal cause of action in Islamic law for her to sue him. The same for a son. In New Jersey and in Canada, I have an obligation to pay child support to my son. But once my son is an adult, I do not have a legal claim that my son support me. But under Islamic law, my son has a legal obligation to support me. I can sue him in court for support. And in every fiqh book, there's a chapter called al-fasl, called fiqh al-aqarib. So these are legal obligations. So when you start looking at these legal obligations that were squarely on the males of society, you would understand this disconnect about the percentages of a spouse, of a wife, or of a daughter. So in other words, a female's rights, financial rights, she's entitled to own, operate, manage property. No one has a legal claim against that property for support. But a male who owns property, all his female relatives have a claim against him for support. So these are kind of like the underpinnings of the economic labor in the pre-modern system. But today, most of my clients who are female, and I represent mostly in my career, I've represented Muslim women, they earn more than their husbands. They're the ones working. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're businesswomen. They're very involved. In fact, I see Muslim women who their brothers are not keeping up with the financial responsibility for their parents. Meanwhile, the daughter is taking that position and supporting her parents. So when you look at these changes in society, of course, there are going to be solutions in the Sharia. One solution in the Sharia for spouses, for a wife, under Islamic law, she's entitled to 1/8 of the estate if the husband had children. If he had no children, she would be entitled to 1/4 of the estate. But under Islamic law, this 1/8 and 1/4, it is from the net estate. So first, before the distributions of these shares occur, you have to pay all the debts on the estate against the marhum or the decedent, any bequests that he left. Now, what are the debts? Mahr, the mu'akhar al-sadaq, is considered a preferential debt against a decedent's estate. In fact, under Qanun al-Ahwal al-Shakhsiyya al-Masri, al-Suri, al-Urduni, the personal status codes of many Muslim countries, including in Pakistan, an unpaid amount of mahr has to be paid from the estate, gross estate, first, before there's distributions. So the wife is going to receive her 1/8 if they're children, plus any outstanding mahr. So my clients that come to me and ask for these solutions, and we've automated this solution on shariawiz.com, is we allow you the option to increase your mahr during marriage. Mahr is a contractual obligation. As long as you, the husband, voluntarily, without coercion, without undue pressure, decide to increase your mahr to your wife during marriage, that's fine. You're obligated to comply with your covenant to contract and your promise. So if you agree to increase it, so your wife is going to receive that mahr plus her 1/8. I mean, I'll use myself as an example. My wife's mahr is the marital residence. We got married. I've been married for 27, 28 years. And we started out with nothing. I went to law school when I was married. I built my career while I was married. So my wife is going to be entitled to a share in all of the sacrifices that she provided for me to help me raise my 3 children and help me be successful in my career. And the house is a major asset. And I've increased my mahr because my mahr was not very high when I got married. We were young. And she will receive the residence plus whatever inheritance that she would receive. This is a solution that many of my clients have elected to use. And it's Sharia compliant, and it doesn't impact any of your Sharia obligations. The other solution is based on 2 theories. You have a theory that's called al-kad was-si'aya. This is in the Maliki school of law. The scholars have basically agreed that if a wife works on the family farm, works in the family business, invests her money, pools her income in the family pot, well, that's her money too. So that means that she has created a legal and equitable claim to the assets that are acquired during the marriage. So you either compensate her for her time, or she takes a share from the assets. So she will receive her share from the assets plus her 1/8. And this is based on a story from Umar ibn al-Khattab. And Amir al-Mu'mineen, Umar ibn al-Khattab, we describe him as the just, al-Faruq. He knew this very well-known embroidery woman in Mecca. And she would weave these beautiful dresses, and her husband would go to the souk and sell them. They had no children. Her husband passed away. So strictly speaking, under Islamic law, she would receive a quarter of the estate. And his paternal family would receive 3/4 of the estate. So she went to the Amir al-Mu'mineen and said, Amir al-Mu'mineen, that doesn't seem to be fair. You know me, I work all night. And my husband would take the materials and the products that I created and sell them in the market. He says, yes, you're absolutely true. You're going to get half of that for your contributions, and you're going to get your quarter for your inheritance. So he flipped the formula. She walked away with 75% of the estate and his family 25%. So you could see the justice when you are fixated and inspired by the moral message of the Quran, and not being a strict constructionist and not looking underlying the moral system. So that was another solution that you can have.
So I want to ask a follow-up on this. This is a very, very enlightening. And Sister Uruj here is asking a question on Facebook about property. And you alluded to the house and how you yourself, the mahr of your wife is the marital residence. So I think in Canada and probably in the US, if one of the spouses were to pass away, the house automatically goes to the other spouse. It's considered the marital residence. So do we need to formalize these Sharia understandings, document them, or can we just accept that this is fulfilled by secular law and just kind of and go from there?
Yeah, well, it's going to depend on your tolerance level. So under Islamic law, there is no concept of right of survivorship. So usually in the U.S., and I don't know Canadian law very well. I mean, I've testified in Canadian courts often on cases, but I would assume it's similar to the U.S. So you can own a property when you're married with the right of survivorship, which basically means that the survivor takes the entire house upon the other spouse's death. So if I die, my wife gets the whole house. If she dies, I get the entire house. Now, that right of survivorship is not permitted under Islamic law. So what you could do is basically either you're going to change title to the home to be 50-50 without the right of survivorship, meaning that when a person passes away, his 50% will be distributed according to the sharia, and the other survivor gets his 50%. You can do it that way. The other way is you can simply document this as your mahr, so that in itself is what your intentions were, and that was the effective method of transferring this asset to your wife within the sharia framework and not relying on the right of survivorship. It's kind of like form over substance almost. So I see your particular point. So it's about tolerance of the parties.
So what about daughters? And you touched on daughters and sons. So alhamdulillah, I'm, for example, blessed with 2 boys and 2 girls. And I do expect that my daughters here in Canada are going to probably be supporting their families. So is there something I can do to aid them, as I'm going to aid the boys as they inherit from me in their financial burden throughout their lives?
Now, there's a couple of scenarios. Number one, you can gift your daughter's property in your lifetime. So that would be a hiba, a gift, and that's legitimate. If you don't have that kind of flexibility, then you have the option of asking your son to consent to release or decrease his share in favor of his sister to be equal. The problem is that this kind of what we would call a disclaimer or a release under Islamic law can only be effective upon your death. So upon the father's death, the sons have to reaffirm that they're going to release some of their inheritance in favor of their sisters so that they would receive equal share. There is a hope that some of the scholars in the West would agree if the sons are adults that they can waive in your lifetime. But there has not been a decision if that would be acceptable. The other role, the way that we approached it in Sharia is, because we cannot take too much liberty, we have to try to stay within the framework, is we include in your will, if the father or mother has children, it would say, son, I told you in my lifetime, when I die, please reduce your share in favor of your sister. I know that you're not obligated to do that under Islamic law, but I just hope that you would fulfill my my intentions. So that's the way we use it in Sharia is.
Because the challenge, as you mentioned earlier, that a daughter or a mother can sue the son for support if the son is delinquent in supporting their female relatives, but in the West that's not possible. There's no obligation.
No obligation. Okay. That's why. Now there's another solution, but this solution, believe it or not, even though it's the Ja'fari solution, the Shi'i law solution, it has been adopted by Sunni scholars in Egypt. So you have what's called the 1/3 wasiyah that we discussed earlier. So you have discretion within 1/3 of your estate to give it to whoever you wish. Sunni law says, La wasiyya li warith. There's a very strong hadith that says, La wasiyya li warith, which means you cannot leave that 1/3 to your daughter. The Shi'i and Ja'fari position, they do not accept that hadith. So they allow a wasiyya to a warith. So the personal status code in Egypt has adopted this particular interpretation. And what happens with some clients, what they would tell me, they're going to use that 1/3 to give to their daughter to equalize the distribution. But again, that's a Shi'i position adopted by some Sunni fatwas in Al-Azhar in Egypt, but it's not the majority position.
Okay. But I think Azhar does recognize the Ja'fari madhab as one of the madhabs that are established in Islamic law. Yeah. As Muslims in the West, we have many families who are have Muslim and non-Muslim members, whether they're we have converts who marry into the faith, marry someone who's Muslim, or who just convert, and they also have parents or siblings or even children who are not Muslim. And generally, I think the understanding is that a non-Muslim does not inherit from a Muslim. But has the Sharia traditionally dealt with this issue? As the Muslim world expanded into Syria and Iraq and Egypt, and for centuries it was actually a mixed Muslim non-Muslim society. How have the scholars dealt with these issues as conversion rates increased and as more people became Muslim from other faiths?
Oh, very easy, because in all traditions there were prohibitions against inheritance to another religion, and people think of this as, oh, that's so not fair and so forth. I understand if we're looking from a prism of a multicultural, plural, legal, secular system, it makes a lot of sense. You would take exception to say, oh, well, because your cousin is not Muslim, he doesn't get a right to inherit. But the problem is that when society was organized based on religious conviction, these are different communities. So you could imagine that your wife is Christian and you live in parts of Syria and Damascus, and all of a sudden you have a claim as the surviving husband to some property that is in the Christian section of Damascus. So all of a sudden you're going to take property away from another community. So there were good reasons on how this was organized. Of course, today the situation is different. So what the scholars have said is they make a distinction. There are what we call ashab al-furud wa ta'sib, meaning these are who are eligible Islamic heirs. When you're an eligible Islamic heir, you have an automatic share, either by prescribed or by ta'sib. So if you are not an automatic Islamic heir, that doesn't mean you don't inherit. It just means that you can leave that person up to 1/3 of your estate. So you can see a situation where many of my clients and people that have been using Sharia Wiz who are from a convert background, they would utilize that 1/3 and leave it to their son who's not Muslim or to their parent that's not Muslim. And that's permissible. There's nothing wrong with that. So yes, you can leave a bequest to a non-Muslim.
Thank you. I want to make sure we get some of the questions from the comments. So Mian Hamid is asking, I think it's a very good question. What happens when someone dies without having a will in the US or Canada?
Well, basically, you're going to follow the secular intestacy laws. So in the US, if you were married, most of the time and you have any children, your parents are not going to inherit. If you have children from the same wife in some jurisdictions, they may not inherit, or they'll take a certain part of your estate. You have no control over it. It's really the secular intestacy laws would govern. That's why in most imams in the United States and people that I've worked with, especially المجلس الأعلى للشؤون الإسلامية في أمريكا الشمالية, the Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs in North America, they've taken a position that it is a fard to have an Islamic will if you live in North America, because without an Islamic will, your estate will not be distributed according to the Sharia, and that is against the direct rulings in the Quran.
So the second part of this question is, what if someone leaves a will, but it's not it's just kind of an informal document that they leave behind at home, and they haven't gone to a lawyer, they haven't had that. So does that have any standing?
Yeah, number one, you don't need a lawyer to make a will. Most people can go online and make their wills. Most people don't have a complex estate. Of course, if you have complex questions and assets that are complicated, and you would need legal advice. It doesn't have to be signed by a lawyer, and it doesn't have to be filed with the court. Generally, at least in the United States, the basic formalities is 2 witnesses witness you sign the will. So you can have a handwritten document saying, this is my last will and testament. I want X, Y, and Z. 2 witnesses, and you sign it. That would be valid. So the formalities for a valid will are very minimal. They're not that complicated.
I also want to say that we are working on hosting a Canadian Muslim lawyer as well, who can help us with some of the more practical components of this issue as it relates to Canada. Another question from the audience, from Tasneem, about paying debts before the distribution. Does it have to be in the will? Because in North America, debts dissolve upon death.
No, generally, debts do not dissolve upon death. Because what happens is that, let's say, I knew I'm gonna die tomorrow, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna overcharge the credit card and call it a day. Well, that credit card company has a claim against your estate. So when you go to probate your will or to transfer property, you're going to have to provide notice to all creditors that you owe them money. So it doesn't dissolve. And you don't have to specifically, in most Islamic wills, and like the Sharia Wiz template, it's basically going to say, after you pay the debts, and the debts include any outstanding zakat, any outstanding mahr, any outstanding liens and so forth on your estate have to be paid first before there's a distribution. So yes, every will have a basic payment of debt in general. Now, what you want to include in your will is not your credit cards and your mortgage, because those are going to get paid. But if you took money from your older brother or from your younger sister or from your uncle, you didn't write it down. So how is he going to get paid? So that's why the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that you don't sleep 2 nights without writing your will, because you don't know what's going to happen. So if I took money from my brother and, a year later I passed away and I forgot to acknowledge and write it, he's not getting his money back. So that's why you write those type of personal debts in your will.
Thank you. Again, getting more questions from the audience. I do have some of my own, but I want to give also the audience a chance. So there's a question about adopted kids. And obviously also we have here foster parents and so on. So can the 1/3 of the wasiyah of the will be used to provide them with leave them with something?
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy that they asked this question, because we designed Sharia Wiz to address many of these issues. Number one, we all know that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was an orphan. And we know that the Quran has a heightened sense of sensitivity towards orphans and towards the care of the young and the orphaned children. So an adopted child is not an Islamic heir, because he's not the biological child. He has to keep the name of his family. But you are free to leave up to 1/3 of your estate to your adopted children. And we provide that in our Islamic inheritance platform.
So another question, thank you. It was, so many of our families, especially here in Winnipeg, we are a growing community. Canada has a very active immigration program. So lots of families coming to Canada from overseas. And so, you have the husband and the wife and the kids living in Canada. They might have grandparents overseas, uncles, aunts, and cousins, and so on. So if the parents one or both of the parents were to pass away, the family overseas would be Islamic heirs. But the family here does not have the support system of an extended family. So does it not put the family at a disadvantage when some of the inheritance has to move overseas?
Well, I mean, yes and no, because number one, we don't know if you've been supporting your parents that are overseas. So that's your obligation, and it's a Quranic directive, excuse me, that you help support your parents. So they're entitled to a share of your estate. But if the parents are self-supporting and they're not in need, Islamically, most of the time, they're going to disclaim. So it's really an issue of timing. So I had a situation, I had a relative who had passed away, and he had children, minor kids. His parents, after his death, went to the Sharia court and waived their claims against his estate, because they would be entitled to 1616, would be 1/3 of the estate. They waived it in favor of the children. So our issue, and you can talk to the Muslim scholars in Canada, is for them, is a waiver from the parents sufficient for me to exclude them from the will? Or do I have to wait until after I die that my parents would sign the waiver? That's really, it's a matter of timing, because most parents are going to say, of course I don't want anything from your estate. I want it to go to your children. They have a right to disclaim. But can they disclaim in your lifetime, or does it have to wait until you die?
And that's a question that requires modern ijtihad, and it's still unresolved.
Scholars to give us a solution.
Right. Okay. I'll take another question from the audience. Would Sharia Wiz be able to help prepare for a will in Canada? I know it's a U.S. product, but can Canadians use it?
No, because we are a state-specific American product. But what I've seen with some people in Canada is they would go ahead and prepare their will on Sharia Wiz, and this way they have an absolute framework that's incorporated a lot of the Sharia solutions that they select. They take it to a Canadian lawyer, and they could use some of those clauses and some of that language to prepare their Canadian specific legal will.
So you could take a template to the Canadian lawyer, and they can work with it and start from it. Okay. Okay. One more question, I think, from the audience. Is the personalized 1/3 on the total or left over? So is the 1/3, I guess, 1/3 of the residue, or is it the total?
1/3 from the gross estate. Well, no, it's from the net, because you have to pay all debts before you do that. But technically, you pay all of the debts, then you pay the bequests. And that would be, after that 1/3, the net would be distributed to the legal heirs. So the 1/3 is being paid as part of the debts, because it's considered a debt on the estate. So it's got to be paid first. So that 1/3 also is in the aggregate. You cannot exceed the 1/3. So you can give one person 1/3, or you can give 10 people in the aggregate 1/3.
So the 10 people would share the 1/3.
Exactly.
Okay. I was reading on your website, you've got some very useful educational content under the heading of halaqa, and this idea of a moral debt, that you may owe your wife a moral debt, you may owe your child who takes care of you a moral debt. Can you elaborate on that and how it comes into play in this concept of inheritance?
We see this often. Like I said, let's say a parent has a daughter and a son. The son marries his college sweetheart, and he ships out to San Francisco, leaving his parents behind in New Jersey. So he's not there to care for them. Meanwhile, the sister, she marries and stays in New Jersey, and she's taking the full responsibility to care for her parents. She makes their doctor's appointments. She goes shopping for them. She goes to take care of them in the evening, taking her away from working overtime, maybe not taking a more demanding executive job, spending her own money to support her family, to support her parents. So a parent can look at that circumstance and say, yes, I know you're my daughter and that you're doing this from the goodness of your heart. But if you weren't here, I would have to pay somebody to do these services and to help me. So I feel like I have a moral obligation to make you whole, a moral obligation to compensate you for what you did. I know that you're doing it for free, but I think I have an obligation to support, to pay you back. So you can acknowledge in your will, because she provided services, I owe her $10,000 or I owe her $50,000, and I want her to be paid from my estate. So she will receive that payment of the debt. Plus, she will receive her inheritance share as per the Quran.
You may have come across this, and again, there might be differences between Canada and the U.S. in this, but can courts overrule the will?
In the U.S., and again, this is probably also in Canada, the only way you overrule a will is, okay, how can you explain this? You can disinherit anyone under U.S. law except your wife. You could leave your entire estate to your cat, and that's legitimate and enforceable. But you cannot disinherit your wife. So in the U.S., most Islamic wills and the Sharia Wiz template includes a spousal waiver of her state rights. Because under New Jersey law, she may be entitled up to 1/3 of your estate if you put it in the will. If you don't give her anything in the will, she can take 1/3. In the Sharia, she's getting 1/8 or 1/4. But she has to sign a waiver that I am waiving my rights under New Jersey law in favor of my rights under Sharia law. If that waiver is valid, there's no court that's going to be able to overturn it. And it would require the spouse to go contest the will. And the same applies to the husband. He has to sign the waiver because he would get 1/4 or 1/2 of the estate in exchange for his right under state law.
Thank you. So we are almost out of time, and I'd like to use what the little time that we have left to have you, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit more about yourself. And I think I hope you don't mind, and I'm asking you to do that in hope that I think it can, inshallah, inspire some of our young folks who are getting into law and whatnot to kind of move from theory to practice, and to also to go after finding solutions in Islam, as opposed to getting kind of stuck and having this very superficial understanding of Islam and the law. So how did you get here? How did you end up doing what you're doing today?
I would say the inspiration, I got two things that my mom and my dad are both my inspiration. My mom is my moral inspiration because her Islam is Islam bil fitra. So it's kind of innate. It's just like, it's not a politicized Islam. It's just Islam. So I grew up in this moral setting. Then my entrepreneurship, it comes from my dad. He's a businessman, entrepreneur, never worked for anybody. So that's where my inspiration came. I was born in the United States, but when I was 6.5 years old, I returned back to Palestine. And I grew up in Palestine, and I went to a Quaker school. I went to an American Quaker school. So I had this background of a very devout mom at home, with a Quaker, liberation theology growing up in elementary school and high school. And then I lived Islam in Palestine, and I lived that natural state. So all of that, what I learned when I got to the US to go to college, it just seemed at that period of time, everybody was taking this position that the problem with Muslim backwardness and Arab backwardness is that their religion is backward.
It was Islam, yeah.
Yeah, that it was Islam, and that got me into a quest of studying and going to graduate school. I finished my undergraduate degree, started in my senior year, I read Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah, and all of a sudden things started to make some sense. And I went to graduate school to study Islamic law at the University of London, School of Oriental and African Studies. And there I stumbled on all these classical texts. And I started learning and saying, well, hold on. This tradition has the ability to create a system of knowledge, produce knowledge, and address a lot of these issues. The religion is not backward. In fact, it is the only way to build a sustainable Muslim civilization that is morally anchored. You can't do it outside of this particular tradition. You gotta delve into the Quran and into the output of this society. So I wrote my MA thesis on the Hadith and a theological philosophical movement called the Mu'tazila. So I learned a lot from that, and from that point, I started delving in and learning Sharia, and especially Usul al-Fiqh, and saying, this is a system that's going to produce knowledge. And that's what inspired me in law school. I focused on any comparative law and Islamic law courses. And then when I opened my practice, I speak fluent Arabic. I'm Muslim and understand the culture. My client base was primarily Muslim. So my clients need these solutions. My clients are asking me these questions. So I have to delve in, research, write, and learn so that I can provide solutions. The solutions are there, but it requires us to take the Quran seriously, because it talks about tata'aqalun, tatafakkarun. It tells you to think. It doesn't tell you to be a strict constructionist. So that's my basic background. My background is growing up in a Muslim country, understanding the beauty and the innocence of Islam, and that inspired me. And that's what moves me now. And my mom, my sisters, my wife, my daughter, that drives me to understand about gender equity, and that Islam, the Prophet in his wada' speech, he talked about protection.
استوصوا بالنساء خيرا. نعم.
And where's our community about this? So that's my drive. And again, the next generation, if they follow the works, if there's anybody listening, if you really want to learn, you read two people that are writing now. Taha Abdul Rahman, the most important Muslim philosopher alive. And he's from Morocco. He's in his 70s. He has created an entire philosophical movement anchored in the Quran. Very, very fascinating and important guy. And the other person who's writing in English is Professor Wa'il Hallaq at Columbia University, who was at McGill in Canada. He's the other most significant historian of Islamic law. These are two people that are providing the theoretical framework for Muslims to build their own epistemology, to build their own moral system, to adapt and contribute to make the world better.
You talk about producing knowledge, and can you what do you mean by that? I mean, what does it mean to produce knowledge for Muslim minorities living in the West? I can understand, for example, if we're trying to address the Malays of the Middle East, of the Arab world, of the Muslim world, but we're here just as small minorities, to kind of struggling to survive, let alone thrive. So what does that mean?
Oh, it means a lot, because Islam as a moral system, and the sharia as the epistemology per excellence of the Muslim tradition, it has the ability to provide knowledge and solutions to the modern ailments that we face today. So let's talk about the ailment of economic inequity in Canada and in the United States. When in the United States, the top 1% own 40% of the assets and wealth of this country. The top 10% own 90% of the wealth of our country. When we have poverty, the destruction of the environment, the abuse of animals, all of this, you can produce knowledge from the Islamic tradition to provide answers. Let's talk about, if we have just a couple of minutes, we can talk about animals.
Please.
Okay. I was reading an interview on who the father of modern animal rights. And the father of animal rights is this guy named Berg in New York, that he started advocating for animals in the 1850s, 1860s. Because people were with their horses, they were beating the horses, they're abusing the horses, they're killing the horses, abusing animals. And he had to build a lobby and get legislation passed in the 1880s and 1900s relating to animal rights. The Prophet Muhammad, 1300 years earlier, prohibited the torture of animals. In fact, after you slaughter an animal, given that we all know about the halal slaughter, that you have to slaughter with a very sharp knife, and you got to hit it from the slice the throat so it doesn't suffer. You cannot skin that animal until it is room temperature, because the Prophet Muhammad said you got to wait to make sure that the soul of the animal exited the body. Otherwise, it would be considered torture. You want to see how they skin the animals in the meat packing industry in the United States or in Canada? Well, look at how they kill the animals, or how they kill the chickens and so forth. The torture that animals go through. So we have scholars at Harvard, Professor Stilt, a colleague of mine, Professor Talut from Morocco, working that the human rights basis for animal rights that is available in Islam surpasses what we have today in Western legal system. Because we're a moral-based system, not a profit-based system. We're a community responsible system, not an individualism system. So this is what our community, our scholars and us, I'm American as apple pie. I was born in this country. My wife is American. My kids are born here. I've represented the Democratic Party in international conventions. There's nobody more American and apple pie than me. So I have an obligation as an American who happens to be Muslim is to contribute to make America better. Its economics is not morally based. Its animal rights is not morally based. So there's a lot of these things that we can produce to help society. Even in the medical system, look at the medical system that we have in the US. We haven't even been able to distribute the vaccines because we view healthcare as a business,
as a product. Yeah.
You know? So these are things that and many other faith-based communities agree with us. And moral philosophy is the happening influx area in most universities in the West, because we have a moral decay and a moral bankruptcy. We have to find solutions. And we as Muslims have a right to be on the table to provide solutions. It's not making them Muslim. This is not about converting people. Just like every other community and tradition is contributing to world civilization and knowledge, we too have something to say, and we too have something to contribute.
Absolutely. But to be able to do that, we need to know where we're coming from, our religion. We need to have a deep understanding of it, and also have the moral courage to put forward these solutions and these positions on a variety of issues. Brother Abed, we can go all night, but unfortunately we are out of time. I know you're also ahead of us on the time zone, so it's getting late for you. So I want to thank you so much for joining us for, I think, what was a very enlightening and educational and just eye-opening discussion. And I hope we can impose on you again to host you again on the virtual mosque here in Winnipeg, and also inshallah after COVID-19 is over to have you come out and visit. We promise to invite you in the summer only, because I don't think you can put up with the cold here in February or January or December. So Jazakallah khair. I think it's this topic is at the intersection of, you know, some of the core concepts of our religion, our submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our view of the sharia as a universal and dynamic system of law and knowledge production, and its ability to address changes. So Jazakallah khair. We very much appreciate your time with us here tonight.
Thank you very much, Dr. Idris. It was really a pleasure. I look forward to stay engaged, and inshallah, the next generation is going to make a difference, and a renaissance of what we can contribute to make the world better is on its way.
Inshallah. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. And for everybody, I want to thank you for joining. I want to say that today we focused on concepts and theory, and inshallah we're working on a follow-up, inshallah, maybe next month or in March, where we'll host a Canadian Muslim lawyer to discuss, you know, Muslim family law in the Canadian context, and some of the more practical components of how this knowledge that we've acquired today from Brother Abed can be applied in the Canadian context. Thank you for joining us. I want to again congratulate Dujan Qassas for winning the MIA baking competition. I want to thank Usaid Khan, Ammar al-Miski, and Sajid. What's his last name? Sajid Khan as well. They're the guys behind the cameras, running the streaming and so on. And they have actually been working hard on putting all of these virtual mosque programs on podcasts. So now if you go to all of the major podcast providers, Apple, Google, and so on, you'll find, and you search Mantibo Islamic Association, you will find the podcasts of these segments. So may Allah bless them for their efforts. And again, I want to especially thank our guest, Professor Abed Awad, for his time and energy. And you know, I find him just a very inspirational individual. May Allah bless him and increase him in knowledge and wisdom, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.